Thank you all for always making me feel welcome whenever I come here. Your conference topic today let me get this right, identity, memory, testimony, is incredibly moving to me since it speaks to all the things that I care about. I think one of the things that we ask in women's studies, in some ways all of our work connects to the question of, who are we? How did we get here? I know there are other disciplines that ask that same question in different ways, but for me, as a trans woman, the question of who am I, how did I get here is fundamental. And I don't think you have to be trans to wrestle with the question of what's the relationship between who I am and who I've been. How did we get there from here? Or is it here from there? For a lot of people, there's a before and after in your life. I guess for everybody, really, if you think about it. I mean, for trans people, for someone like me, there's a very obvious before and after, which is also the difference between an early life as a man and a later life as a woman. But all of us struggle with that to a certain extent. The most obvious way is the difference between being old and being young. But we go through all of these journeys that change us, and we wind up at a certain point trying to figure out what's the relationship between who we are now to all the selves that we have experienced over the years. Where is that child now? What's the relationship between who we are now and who we're going to be, that older woman or man? So for a lot of trans people that I know, there's this, there can be a real struggle, too, to see one's life as a series of connected moments, to see it as a whole, rather than as a before and an after. Some people that I know, like me, don't lie about the first half of their life. They just say that they were always female. Well, that's actually, I have to be careful because that's not completely a lie. But there's some people that I know that never refer to their experiences in the first half of their life. So that in a way, they've traded one secret for another. And in a way, there are people, a lot of my fellow travelers wind up without a past or without a real good connection between who they've been and who they are. It can be odd to be a middle-aged woman who had a boyhood. Can you be a woman without having had a girlhood? Well, yeah, sure you can. But what kind of woman are you? What kind of woman am I having not had a girlhood? I would argue for my womanhood and for my humanity if anybody wanted to fight about it. Not that you all seem like you. Maybe we'll wait till the dessert course for the rumble. But the difference between me and most of you is that I was socialized as a boy, at least up to a certain point, and that makes me a different kind of woman. And I think that it's something that I have to accept. I am now okay with seeing it as a good thing. And whenever I talk to people, and not just trans people, I try to encourage them to see who they have been and who they are and who they're becoming as one person, one journey, one life. But it can be hard, especially if in the past there's been trauma, if there have been parts of your life you're not proud of or parts of your life you want to get away from. So building a life that's a whole, well, to some degree, it's a journey that never stops. And again, it's not unique to trans people. I think it's all of us. I have come here with 4 things to read to you. Looking at the clock, I don't know how they're all going to fit into 35 minutes, but we'll see. And I might cut one if it doesn't work. The first and the last are from a brand new work of mine that's coming out next year. It is a memoir about parenthood and the differences between motherhood and fatherhood. It's called Stuck in the Middle with You, Parenthood in 3 Genders. and it refers to my to the time in my life when I was a father, later part of my life when I'm as a mother, and then a part in the middle where I was betwixt and between. So I want to read those two pieces from the new book as bookends. And in the middle, time allowing, I'm going to read a piece which appeared in the It Gets Better anthology, which was actually a rewritten something piece from She's Not There. And then the third piece I'll read will be from my memoir about growing up in an allegedly haunted house and the way everybody is haunted to a certain extent by who they've been and by the thought of who they may become. So I'll begin this by reading to you from Stuck in the Middle with You. And this is from the first chapter. In this chapter, I won't read you from the very, very beginning, but this starts off with me at a fencing match at my son's school, where my son is fencing, and I'm sitting in the bleachers next to a woman named Grenadine, who unbelievably confesses to me as we're watching the kids fencing that A, her husband is in Iraq, and B, she kind of hopes he doesn't come back because of who he, and this conversation, I mean, it's unbelievable the conversations you can find yourself in a high school gymnasium. So I'll start off right at the end of that scene. He's just not a nice guy, she said to me. The army changed him. I shrugged. People change, I said. Coming from me, this was an understatement. You think? Something throbbed in my left breast. It wasn't sentiment. An odd, pulsing pain had been lurking in me for a month or two. I'd been doing a self-exam in a shower in a hotel in New York back in December when I'd first found the lump. Incredibly, I tried to pretend it wasn't there for the first month or two. But every time I felt for it, it was still there. I found it, larger. A mammogram was scheduled for the next day, the morning after the fencing tournament. I'd begun to do some, and by the way, everything's fine, so don't worry. I'd begun to do some of the math in my head. Having seen my own father and then my sister-in-law slain by cancer, suffering through the chemo and the radiation and the surgery, only to die agonizing deaths nonetheless, I'd already decided, all right, well, if it's cancer, I'm not doing any of that. I'll just go to the zoo and jump in the lion's cage. It wasn't that I didn't love my life. The opposite, in fact. As someone who had lived a full life as a man, then survived the perilous transition, and then lived another 10 euphoric years as a woman, I had plenty of things to be grateful for. Quite frankly, I couldn't imagine anyone having had such a lucky life as my own, in spite of all the tears my condition and the effects that it had had on others had engendered. I'd been married for almost 25 years to a woman I adored who still adored me. I'd had what felt, at times, like the best job in the world, teaching English at Colby. I'd written a best-selling book, been a guest of Oprah Winfrey, even been imitated by Will Forte on Saturday Night Live, who, according to some people, did a better impression of me than I did. I had two brilliant and resilient sons, each of them with amazing and fabulous hair. Quite frankly, there wasn't a whole lot left on my to-do list, other than sit back and wonder and see what happens next. Oh, I hate that, said Grenadine softly. I hate it when people change. I was a father for 6 years, a mother for 10, and for a time in between I was both, or neither, like some parental version of the schnoodle or the cockapoo. Of course, as parents go, I was a rather feminine father. For that matter, I suppose I'm a masculine mother. When I was their father, I showed my boys how to make a good tomato sauce, how to fold a napkin, how to iron a dress shirt. As their mother, I've shown them how to split wood with a maul. Whether this means I've had one parenting style or two, I'm not entirely certain. I can assure you I'm not a perfect parent and will be glad to review the long list of my mistakes. But in dealing with a parent who subverts a lot of expectations about gender, I hope my sons have learned to be more flexible and open-hearted than many of their peers with traditionally gendered parents. I would like to think that this has been a gift to them and not a curse. It is my hope that having a father who became a woman has made my two remarkable boys, in turn, into better men. Zach learned to shave when he was 2 years old by watching me. He says that this is one of his primary memories of me as a man, the morning ritual of the razor and the hot steam from the basin. Zach stood upon a stool so that he could see his face in the bathroom mirror. I used to coat his young pink cheeks with Gillette Foamy, then give him a razor with a protective shield still on the blade. As I shaved my face, Zach would shave his. He'd mimic the contortions I'd make with my face in order to keep my skin taut. And then he'd shave his own face in the same order I shaved mine. Cheeks first, then the neck, then the chin, mustache last. We stood before the mirror, the two of us. I wiped the steam away from the top half of the mirror so I could see myself. Zach wiped a smaller hole away for himself at the bottom. Our expressions were so serious as we shaved, as men's faces always are, as they undertake this business, as if we are not shaving, but staring out across the bridge of our intergalactic star destroyer. Afterwards, we'd towel down our faces, removing the residual froth, and smacking our smooth cheeks lightly with an air of manly satisfaction. There, he'd say, I'm clean as a whistle. That Christmas, Dee Dee, and I'll pause here to mention that my wife's name is Dee Dee. I call her Grace in She's Not There and in I'm Looking Through You. But her real name is Dee Dee, and I'm using, in the next book, I'm just using everyone's real names. I think the boys were called Luke and Patrick in my earlier memoirs, but at this point, what's the difference? Dee Dee bought Zach his own pretend shaving kit one Christmas, complete with a plastic razor. When he opened this gift, though, he immediately burst into tears. What? Said Dee Dee, discouraged that what had seemed like the perfect gift had gone so wrong. I don't want a baby razor, Zach wept, looking at me for backup. I want a real one. Dee Dee just shook her head, slightly irritated at our son's preference for reality over fantasy. If shaving with a bladeless razor with a father who would soon become a woman could, by any stretch of the imagination, be called reality. 12 years later, when Zach began to shave for real, he did it with an electric razor, one of those contraptions with the floating heads. I didn't show him how to do it either, although I tried to. But he stopped me as he headed into the bathroom and said, Maddie, I got it from here. In She's Not There, there's the story of how they come to call me Maddie, which is their combination of mommy and daddy, and that name has stuck. A moment later, the door closed, and I sat down in the kitchen and listened to the faint buzzing sound coming through the wall. I didn't learn how to shave from my father either, which turns out, I think, not to be so strange. One of the things about manhood I learned from my father is that it's a solitary experience, frequently, a land of silences and understatements, a place where a lot of important things have to be learned alone. Whereas womanhood, a lot of the time, is a thing you get to share. I remember going for a bra fitting once, and the salesman just waltzed right into my changing room in the middle of things to check the fit. When she entered the room, I was flabbergasted. I wasn't prepared for anyone to barge in while, what's the phrase? My cups runneth over? But in seeing my astonishment, the salesman just laughed. Oh, honey, she said, please. We're all women here. How was it? I asked Zach when he emerged from the bathroom, stroking his face. I was all set to have a big conversation about the experience. Shaving, for the first time, another rite of passage. Do you remember, my sweet boy, when you were 2, we used to stand before the mirror together, you and I, staring through the clouds of steam. I imagined the two of us sitting down together and having a meaningful conversation, taking the measure of our rapidly passing lives. It was fine, said Zach. With a hint of annoyance in his voice, I recognized that tone. It said, it was what it was, and it wasn't all that interesting, and do we have to talk about it? Not everything in the world, my son was trying to tell me, is worthy of analysis. Okay, I said, trying not to be hurt. Zach shook his head, bent down next to me. Really, he said. It was fine. He gave me a hug to make up for his silence, and I hugged him back, and my cheek brushed against his. Smooth. I don't know, Grenadine was saying as we waited for the next round of competition to start. I don't think everybody has to say the same forever. I just don't see why I have to stay stuck when he's not who I married. This was, of course, the question that obsessed me. The previous week, Dee Dee and I had sat in the audience at the Kents Hill Theater, that's their school, Kents Hill, and watched as our younger son, Sean, stepped into a spotlight and recited Sonnet 116. All together now. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh, no. It is an ever-fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. Sitting there in the audience, I admit the tears had rolled down my cheeks. For one thing, surely no other family had found alteration as had ours, nor any wife been so ever fixed in her adoration for the one she loved as Dee Dee had been for me. For another, Sean looked so grown up on the stage, his wild hair lit by stage lights. Dee Dee saw me wipe away the tears. Dear God, she muttered, here we go again. How did your husband change? I asked Grenadine, and I thought, I should be charging for this. He's so angry all the time, said Grenadine. He comes home all wound up from the war, then he won't talk about it. He broods and broods, then he signs up again, while Ethan and I keep getting older without him. Ethan's the son. I'm sorry, I said. How am I supposed to show Ethan how to be a man, she asked. How am I supposed to teach him that? You can teach him right from wrong, I said. You can teach him how to be kind. Grenadine looked at me as if I were from another planet, as if learning how to be kind wasn't the thing she was worried about. I'm just afraid Ethan is going to wind up like his father, she said. Like him how? Like he's going to leave me, and then I'll never see him again. She laughed bitterly. The less his father is around, she said, the more Ethan winds up like him. There are all kinds of men in the world, I said to Grenadine. You can teach Ethan to be different. The referee was talking to Zach on the mat below us. Zach had put down the book he was reading and was now twisting his long hair behind him and lowering his helmet over his head. I realized now that he was playing for the championship, that it was down just to Zach and one other fencer. Grenadine turned to me as if I were her last friend on earth. How? She said. How can I teach him? Below us, Ethan stepped toward the ring. Of course, it was Ethan Zach would be facing for the championship. These two completely different variations on what it meant to be a man. In this corner, the goofy young hippie with his heart on his sleeve. In the other, the young Marine with his deadly flesh and heart-rending scream. Flesh is not flesh. Flesh is a move in fencing. It's when you kind of charge at someone forward. That's called fleshing. Although it's an interesting term, isn't it? Grenadine said it again, more urgently this time. How? She asked me. It was a good question. Our sons faced each other and bowed. On guard, said the ref. And then the young men drew their swords. All right. So we'll leave that there. Well, that's how that chapter ends. So, thank you. Stop. Okay, here's a piece from the It Gets Better anthology. It's a rewritten scene from She's Not There. So some of you will recognize this same story, played in a slightly different key. This piece was also written for high school students, so it may seem a little below your pay grade. But on the other hand, who better to understand things written for young people than those who aren't so much? I don't know what I'm saying. Let's move on. This is called In the Early Morning Rain. When I was young, there was a time when I figured, the hell with it. I'd never even said the word transgender out loud. I couldn't imagine saying it, ever. I mean, please. So instead, one day, a few years after I got out of college, I loaded all my things into the Volkswagen and I started driving. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew I wanted to get away from the Maryland spring with its cherry blossoms and its bursting tulips and all its bullshit. I figured I'd drive farther and farther north until there weren't any people. I wasn't sure what I was going to do then, but I was certain something would occur to me that would end this transgender business once and for all. I set my sights on Nova Scotia. I drove to Maine. I took a ferry out of Bar Harbor. I drove onto the SS Blue Nose and stood on the deck and watched America drift away behind me, which, as far as I was concerned, was just fine. There was someone walking around in a rabbit costume on the ship. He'd pose with you, and they'd snap your picture, and an hour or so later, you could purchase a photo of yourself with a rabbit as a memento of your trip to Nova Scotia. I purchased mine. It showed a sad-looking boy, I think that's a boy, with long hair reading a book of poetry as a moth-eaten rabbit bends over him. In Nova Scotia, I drove the car east and north for a few days. When dusk came, I'd eat in a diner. Then I'd sleep either in the car or in a small tent that I had in the back. There were scattered patches of snow up there, even in May. I kept going north until I got to Cape Breton, which is about as far away as you can get from Baltimore and still be on dry land. In Cape Breton, I hiked around the cliffs, looked at the ocean. At night, I lay in my sleeping bag by the sea as breezes shook the tent. I wrote in my journal, or read the poetry of Robert Frost, or grazed around in the modern library's great tales of horror and the supernatural. I read one up there with the title, "Oh, Whistle, and I'll Come to You, My Lad." In the car, I listened to the Warlocks sing "In the Early Morning Rain," which goes like this. In the early morning rain, with $1 in my hand, and an aching in my heart, and my pockets full of sand. I'm a long way from home, and I miss my loved ones so. In the early morning rain, with no place to go. I thought about this girl I knew, Finney. Thought about my parents. Thought about the clear, inescapable fact that I was female in spirit and how, in order to be whole, I'd have to give up on every dream I'd ever had, except for one. I stayed in a motel one night that was officially closed for the season, but which the operator let me stay in for half price. I opened my suitcase and put on my bra and some jeans and a blue knit top. I combed my hair out and looked in the mirror and saw a perfectly normal-looking young woman. This is so wrong, I said to myself in the mirror. This is the cause of all the trouble. I thought about settling in one of the little villages around there, just starting life over as a woman. I could tell everyone I was Canadian. Then I lay on my back and sobbed. Nobody would ever believe I was Canadian. The next morning, I climbed a mountain at the far northern edge of Cape Breton Island. I climbed up to the top, trying to clear my head, but it wouldn't clear. I kept going up and up past the tree line, past the shrub line, until at last there was just moss. And there I stood, looking out at the cold ocean, 1,000 miles below me, totally cut off from the world. A fierce wind blew in from the Atlantic. I leaned into it. I saw the waves crashing against the cliff below. I stood right at the edge. My heart pounded. I leaned over the edge of the precipice, but the gale blowing into my body kept me from falling. When the wind died down, I'd start to fall, and then it would blow me back up again. I played a little game with the wind, leaning a little farther over the edge each time. Then I leaned off the edge of the cliff at a sharp angle, my arms held outward like wings, my body sustained only by the fierce wind, and I thought, well, okay, is this what we came here to do? Then a huge blast of wind blew me backwards, and I landed on the moss. It was soft. I stared straight up at the blue sky, and I felt a presence. Are you all right? Is it a voice? You're going to be all right. Looking back now, I'm still not sure whose voice that was. My guardian angel? The ghost of my father? I don't know. Does it really change things all that much to give a name to the spirits that are watching out for us? Still, from this vantage point, over 25 years later, my heart tells me that that was the voice of my future self, the woman that I eventually became, a woman who, all these years later, looks more or less like the one I saw in the mirror in the motel. Looking back on that sad, desperate young man, I want to tell him, it will get better. It will not always hurt the way it hurts now. The thing that right now you feel is your greatest curse will someday, against all odds, turn out to be your greatest gift. It's hard to be gay or lesbian. To be trans can be even harder. There have been plenty of times when I've lost hope. But in the years since I heard that voice saying, are you all right? You're going to be all right. I found, to my surprise, most people have treated me with love. Some of the people I most expected to lose when I came out as trans turned out to be loving and compassionate and kind. I can't tell you how to get there from here. You have to figure that out for yourself. But I do know that instead of going off that cliff, I walked back down the mountain that morning and instead began the long, long journey toward home. Thank you. Please hold your applause until the names of all the transsexuals have been read. Boy. You know, it's something about singing. Always makes me all squishy. Okay, so here's another one. This one's from I'm Looking Through You, which was a book about growing up in an allegedly haunted house and which uses haunting as metaphor for, well, you know, for everything. In this particular scene, I'm at a high school reunion of the class of '76 at my allegedly all-male high school. Yeah, my gosh. And I'm walking around with an old friend of mine whose nickname was Duber, for reasons we need not discuss, but which are perhaps self-evident. Duber and I snuck away from the class of '76 cash bar after a little while. We walked through the hallways of the upper school, gin and tonics in hand. The place was eerily unchanged, the old hallways still filled with the smell of pencil shavings and sweat, the eagle on top of the American flag in one of the classrooms still covered with the same old dust. We peeked into the empty cafeteria, looked out the windows of the old study hall. I remembered throwing a paper airplane out of one of that study hall's high. Well, I'm sorry, I'm breathing now. Sorry. Is that better? It should be like this, actually. There. I'm having a little moment. Yeah, feel free to talk among yourselves. Okay, let's try that. Okay? Did it get quieter just now? You can hear me okay? All right. Oh yes, I was with a paper airplane. I remember throwing a paper airplane out of one of the study hall's high windows one spring afternoon and watching that airplane sail forever. On a wall near the headmaster's office was an oil painting of my former nemesis, the headmaster named Mr. Flinch. He'd been dead for nearly 20 years now. He used to walk around yelling at me, telling me that I didn't have any gumption. You know, he was right about me. I said, I didn't have any gumption. Yeah, well, said Duber, fuck him, man. You got plenty of gumption. You asked me, you're the fucking gumption poster child. What does he know about it? Nothing. Sorry, I should have. My mother would have asked, she said, you know, whenever you do that, you should always apologize to people for your work containing language. I said, Mom, I'm an English professor. All my work contains language. She says, you know what I mean. We walked down the hallway of the upper school. It was odd to be walking around there with a gin and tonic and a vagina. There was a time I could have gotten detention for this. This is all like some crazy dream, I said. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up. It was like some dream the first time, said Duber. You know what they say about how history repeats itself? First time is tragedy. Second time is like some big old pile of bullshit. We paused before the doorway of the old bio lab. Once, there'd been giant slide rules on the wall. a tattered chart of the periodic table. We'd all had to write reports about the elements back in the day. Me, I'd gotten stuck with mercury. You know what would be excellent, said Duber, if you could like find your kid self and like tie him up and have some sick conversation. What would you tell your kid self, I asked. Me, said Duber, I wouldn't tell him anything. What do I know? You wouldn't warn yourself about the future? Duber looked confused. Warn myself, he said. About what? It was possible, I thought, that Duber and I had two entirely different conceptions of time. I looked down the hallway, imagined the bell ringing, all the schoolboys pouring out of their classrooms, thundering toward their lockers. Nixon was president again. And look, there I was, last out of English class, already late for whatever came next. Hey, kid, wait a second. I have to tell you something. Young James paused for a moment. He thought he'd heard something, but he wasn't sure what. The startled, willowy creature looked over in our direction with his television tube glasses and his long hair and his tie. But there was no one there. Can I ask you a question, Duber? I said. Seriously? He shrugged. It was all the same to him whether I asked him a question or not. Do you believe in ghosts? He nodded. I do, but now he was doing that thing he used to do back in high school, where sometimes he spoke like the Cowardly Lion. I do believe in spooks. I do. Okay, thanks. It's fun. That's a fun scene to read, and I don't get to read that very often. But I was thinking just of the theme of this conference. I was thinking that would be a cool one to share with you. Okay, so now I'm going to read the very last chapter of the new book. And I don't think this needs any setup at all. It's called Anti-Venom. And it's just a short little thing. We were driving up a dirt road together, Zach and I, fighting about this essay he'd written for school, Where I'm Going to Be 10 Years From Now. His prediction? Australia, developing anti-venom for the hog-nosed viper. I offered my opinion. No. You should be proud, he said. He was 18. Me, getting a PhD in toxicology, helping to save lives. You're not handling poisonous snakes for a living, okay? You're not. It's my life. I know it's your life, but if you're dead, it's my life. Plunged into darkness. I'm not going to die. Of course you're going to die. Australia has the deadliest snakes in the world. We were driving toward the cabin of his fiddle teacher. He hadn't practiced. My son cast a glance at me. You should believe in me, he said. Of course I believe in you. I just don't want you to get hurt. I'm not going to get hurt. You're going to handle deadly snakes. How can you possibly not get hurt? You pick them up, he said, with a long stick. Oh, well, a long stick. That really puts my mind at ease. He shook his head. He was irritated now. You don't believe I can milk the venom from snakes. Zach, you failed your driver's license 3 times. You've lost every pair of glasses you've ever owned. Of course you're going to get bitten by a poisonous snake and die, and then my life will be plunged into darkness. Darkness! They have anti-venom for the snakes, he explained. If there's any trouble, I'll just take the anti-venom, okay? If they already have anti-venom, why do you have to handle the snakes? I thought developing the anti-venom was the whole point. Why would you handle the snakes if you already have anti-venom? You're shouting. Of course I'm shouting! This is why I changed all those diapers. This is what I gave my whole life to. You, dead in Australia, poisoned, alone. He just shook his head. In lieu of conversation, he turned on his iPod, which was wired to the car stereo. The car filled with blarney, the pipes and the fiddles and all the rest. To Dublin town I made my way, then to Cove in America. Now I'm in the land of liberty, a fig for all my foes. I guess his theory was, a little music from the old country might soften me up. He was wrong. Something ran across the road before us, and Zach jammed on the brakes. It all happened quickly. 1 minute, we were listening to The Pursuit of Farmer Michael Hayes. The next, we were spinning through space, waiting to see if we would live. We skidded into the ditch. From the woods, a coyote paused and looked back at us. I saw the wildness in his eyes. There was movement from the other side of the road. A young coyote pup looked at Zach and me suspiciously. Its breath came out in clouds. Then it leaped across the road to follow its mother, wherever it was she was taking them at that late hour. Good driving, I said. Excellent reactions. He started the car again, got us out of the ditch. We started up the hill again. I told you could trust me, he said. He'd just gotten into college a couple months before this, early decision at Vassar. My other boy was off to South Africa. He'd been accepted as an exchange student at a school in Cape Town called Bishop's College. In only a few weeks from then, we would take him to Logan Airport and load the 15-year-old onto the plane. Now the sun was sinking toward the ridge to my right. The long, shining mirror of Long Pond was visible in the valley. Silence hung in the air between us. And not for the first time. I could feel my sons leaving me, going out into the broad world. There were times as if they were already gone. Zach, I said, finally, if you really, really want to milk the poison from deadly snakes in Australia, if that's your dream, I'll support you. Thank you, Maddie, he said, and rubbed my shoulder. Look, I'm verklempt the podium about the snakes, sorry. Thank you, Maddie, he said, and rubbed my shoulder. That was their name for me, Maddie, their combination of mommy and daddy. This means a lot to me. I'll always support you in your dreams, I said, even if your dreams are stupid. My throat closed up. The tears rolled down. Of course, if it was the stupidity of dreams we were considering, I was one to talk. I mean, please. I thought of the hours I'd spent at Zach's age, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, imagining a world a whole lot more distant than Australia. We pulled up at the violin teacher's house, right at the top of Buttermilk Hill. The pastures of her farm were all around us, and beyond that, the mountains and the lakes. Her husband's single-engine plane sat at the edge of a long field. A windsock dangled from a pole just beyond a long field of tomatoes and cabbages. From the cabin came the sound of skirling mandolins and fiddles. My son looked at me, incredulous. "You're crying now," he said, "about me getting bitten by an imaginary snake in Australia in the future. You're actually crying." A little. I wiped the tears away and we got out of the car. The sun was almost gone now, sinking behind the mountains. We walked toward the cabin. The music grew louder. His teacher was playing a reel, The Farewell to Erin. In the twilight, it was hard for me to see the stairs. I paused at the bottom step, unsteady on my old legs, uncertain. My son turned to me and took me by the arm. "Come on, Maddie," he said. "I got you." Thank you.